Oh, what a day! What a lovely day!
Welcome to Flat Earth Debate Live. I'm your host, Nathan Oakley, and if you are new to this channel, or you've not done so already, then be sure to subscribe, hit the bell notification icon, and join button if you'd like to become a Nathan Oakley 1980 channel member and keep up to date with the Flat Earth Debate. If you would like to support the channel, there is a super chat that runs alongside each of these shows while they are live, and there's also a PayPal, Patreon, crypto, and thanks button in the info box below the video. Most importantly, if you'd like to join the discussion, simply mute the page you are currently watching, then click the link in the info box below this video to join the panel and express your views on the nature of Earth. If you do join, please don't swear. If you do, you'll be ejected, and if you are, please don't try to rejoin the stream using sock accounts. You'll be warmly welcome back on the next stream. Please also share the show on social media. Sharing the show obviously increases the live audience, but this in turn increases the chances of a more diverse panel, so please share the show on Facebook and Twitter. Now, we are joined by Arwin, Chocolate Saiyan, Eli, Neil, 10th Man, Brian's Logic, and a whole bunch of people in Discord, so welcome one and all.
Hello, hello, good
Get it
afternoon.
going, let's get it going.
Oh, yeah,
Good morning.
Good morning. Any evidence of the distance to the sun?
93 million miles away, according to textbooks.
You'll need an R value for that. You'll also need Kepler's third law of interplanetary motion and a supposition that the R base value you can no longer measure, hence Black Swan, 1st Jan 2020, of the R value at the physical geometric limitation of Earth, sphere, horizons that no longer exist, superimposed onto Venus so you can get the scaling values to give you your 93 million mile distance. We have debunked every single aspect of every assumption that comes with that value, Neil.
What?
Mumble, mumble. Any
I
evidence?
was doing the impersonation of the guy on Friday. When you said that, he said, what? What?
Oh, right. Okay, fair enough. Any evidence that you can have gas pressure without a container?
No, there was no evidence that you can have gas pressure without a container. That's an impossibility.
Only if you change the definition of gas pressure or a container.
What about pressurized gas? Huh? How about that?
You can't have pressurized gas. That's the same as gas pressure. That's the force it exerts on the walls of its containment. Without containment, you have to have containment to have a force of it pressing on the containment.
In their worldview, they will go to, which is debunked thoroughly, gravity. They'll say gravity is keeping the pressure on the Earth.
Gravity's not a force. Gas doesn't go down 9.8 meters per second squared. Gas expands in all directions and is created at ground level and expands into whatever availability of volume it has to fill. It disperses through other gases, so you can have a high concentration of gas at the point of introduction prior to its dispersion in line with entropic law into whatever volume it's got, after it's bounced off all of the existing gas that's in its way. But eventually, because there's only gaps between the gases that are in its way, it will make its way between the gaps and disperse evenly between all of the other gases. Now, if there's a cycle in place, as we have here on Earth, then it will just become part of that cycle. But with those exceptions notwithstanding, gas always behaves in the exact same manner, which is to say that it expands in all directions to fill whatever availability of volume it has to fill, as opposed to going down 9.8 meters per second squared in line with a non-force force that you can think of as a force called gravity, which is actually the pseudo-Riemannian force space-time bending in Einstein's imagination. Hope that's clear.
Well, it's clear, but it doesn't solve the problem for them, because when they look at craters on the moon at 90-degree angle, they say it's this magic speed that created that, even though the asteroid came in on a sideways trajectory. So with the gravity one, they'll say there's this magic Karman line. What do you got to say for the Karman line?
Just imaginary. It's an arbitrary described position that they ascribe to a heliocentric sphere Earth with sphere-shaped air around it and an arbitrary non-physical barrier they describe which hasn't got any barrier attributes. It's completely arbitrary. What is the Karman line? Show it me. Oh, right, it doesn't exist. It's completely arbitrary. It's certainly not a container. It's just how they qualified the V, so that they've got a volume to calculate. What's the volume? Well, it's the gas that's below the Karman line. All right, what's the Karman line? Well, it's this arbitrary point that gas violates natural law. Just has a cigarette, burns its bra, and says, sod gas law, I'm not expanding anymore, I'm going to stop right here. Might go back down again, 9.8 meters per second, why not? No, the gas doesn't behave like that. It just expands. So when it reached the Karman line, whatever gas they're saying is the volume below it, what does it do? Does it stop? No, gas continues in whatever direction it's got, at whatever speed it's travelling, and until it hits something. That's what it does. So no, there's no Karman line. It's nonsense. It's just a way of giving them volume.
What if there was nothing to hit while simultaneously no space in which to expand?
A quick question then. Is the use of the word wall in the definition of the gas pressure give us an indication of what the container is?
Yeah.
Physical.
Yeah.
So it has
Solid.
to have some.
It has to be physically capable of having a gas particle hit it and bounce off it.
Thank you very much. Okay, interesting.
Unless
What
you
if it
know
was
some
just
kind of a
the end?
container that isn't physical that actually functions as a container, that would
Ooh,
be interesting.
what about if I show you?
I would like to know.
What about if I show you gas pressure without a container inside a container, Alwyn? Would that qualify?
No, unfortunately not, because you'd need
Well,
a
I don't
container
know,
to
but-
demonstrate that.
Yeah.
Before Humble asked this question, I asked a question which didn't yet get answered, which might be pertinent to that point.
Go on.
What if there's nothing to hit, yet simultaneously no available space in which to travel into?
Well, that's a fascinating speculation. I can only go on the information that I understand and appreciate within the world that I experience physically, which is to say that the description of gas behaviour would suggest, by way of antecedent consequent relationship, that it must have a physical barrier to press upon. Now, if you're saying that a non-physical end to the space we experience would constitute physical, then if you can provide the demonstration of that, then I'll happily accept it. Can you show me non-space? That would be the end of physical space. Non-area for gas to expand into. And the edge of the area where gas is expanding, forming a barrier to be constituting a description of containment. Can you show me that? Obviously not.
Well,
Non-space?
transversely,
non-space.
transversely, one could ask.
Nobody was being asked from
Transversely,
G+.
one could add-
Hello? Go ahead, AI.
Transversely, one could ask, show me infinite free space that's available. And we have the same philosophical problem.
So what do we fall on? What we know. We know that gas behaves in a certain way, and we have gas pressure. So we can only derive what we know at this point. Now, do I know what the container is? No. Does that weaken my argument that by way of natural law, we can only describe what we experience always, which is to say that gas requires containment? Now, if you're saying that the non-physical physical barrier constitutes containment, I'd need to have that qualified in some form, because to my argument, it makes no odds. I don't care what the barrier is. You say it's a non-physical end to the space we experience in three-dimensionality? Well, okay, if you say so. I don't care. Okay, yeah, if you say so. Fine. I mean, I don't buy that. I don't know. But I'm happy to say I don't know.
Well, if you don't stick with what is real and what you know to be real and can demonstrate, then you're going off into a world of anything can happen.
La La Land.
Yes.
Well, fair, but the only two propositions that are even plausible are there's a fixed volume of free space available, or there's an infinite volume of free space available.
Volume.
It's a false
Infinite.
dichotomy if ever I've heard
Can't
one.
have an infinite volume.
We just don't know. To offer up any dichotomy is unreasonable, because we do not know. The speculation placed in a dichotomy. No, I just don't buy it.
Exactly. So you would do a classical Einsteinian thought experiment, which is an indefinite ray. So you begin a ray at point A, right, and it continues at the direction which you fire it, so to speak, indefinitely. So then you must ask yourself, will it stop at some point? Will it hit something at some point? Or will it just keep going and increase the amount of distance between me and it ad infinitum. That is what I mean by an infinite volume in which to go into, or an infinite amount of free space. If there's a limited amount of free space,
Hold on,
in
hold on.
other words,
Before you,
shoot
hold on,
your indefinite
hold on,
ray.
hold on. Before you move
Go
on to
ahead.
the alternative. Yeah, I get. We heard it the first time, and your expansion on it is fine. But no. There's no reason to in any way for the former, the one you've just qualified, assume that to be in any way experienceable or physical beyond your Einstein. How did you describe it? Your Einsteinian thought experiment. There's no way to qualify that physically at all. So immediately I can discount that. Does that mean that the alternative that's about to come next is true? Well, let's see. What's the alternative?
The alternative is that rather than the ray being able to travel indefinitely, so it ever increases the distance between you and it, that it reaches the end of available free space in which it has no space to travel and therefore just stops.
Sorry, what's a ray?
Well, in this, it's just a line that continues. Ray in the sense of a line.
It's
not ray in the
physically
sense of any
experienceable,
type
though,
of
right?
energy.
We can definitely experience one of these rays physically, can't we? Definitely,
Yeah,
right?
you could do it in the form of a bullet. Because, like, for example, there's a commonly held position that if you set something in motion, right, in a direction, it will maintain that motion and direction ad infinitum and never stop. We all agree that that's generally what people believe.
Can be
Some might
in
even
no way
qualify it as a
qualified
law.
for the same reasons I gave as an objection for the first description in the false dichotomy. No. You show me a bullet fired off into an infinite vacuum so that there's no other molecules of gas or anything else to interact with it so that it continues at the same speed.
Mm-hmm.
You can't show me that. Now, my description of gas expanding into a volume of space is qualifiable by gas expanding into every space I can ever introduce it to. So I can definitely qualify that and not need to decry the antithesis, which is to say that, well, in their description with it expanding at infinity, or however you described it, well, that's just a description. Well, it might do that if it had infinite space available to it. Can you show me it? No. So it's just merely speculation, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me phrase it this way. Can anyone show an object in motion maintaining motion indefinitely
No.
unless acted on by an outside force?
No.
Exactly.
Right. So it's just merely speculation. So that's yeah. In case anybody's pondering,
if I'm not mistaken, is that not considered one of the laws of motion?
yeah, the laws of Newton were not right.
There you go.
Okay. Shout out to Skeptic 37. There's Godzilla 37. Thank you for the super chat. Really appreciate it. I'm sure I'll muddle your names up. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. More than ever, I've got unpaid bills. So appreciate your super chats. Right, we're going to cover Sabine again today. So basically, we had an umming and ahhing session before the live show started about whether or not we were going to cover this. And we came to the conclusion that at worst, it's got a tertiary connection to the nature of reality as we label it on the show only. So flat earth debate. There is still a connection, albeit a slightly more loose one. When that was put forth to the panel and Discord by me, AI rightly pointed out that the way it's phrased in the intro, which is admittedly an updated way of introducing the concepts we do cover here, it's the nature of Earth that we are covering. So that's what people are encouraged to present, be it concave or parallel universes or string theory, whatever it is that they've got as a view in the terms that we discuss here. So therefore, it's much more connected to how we generally discuss things about the nature of Earth, as opposed to whether or not the Earth is commonly argued to be a spherical shape or a flat plane as we measure it. So there we go. So based on that, we are definitely going to be covering this, and I will share the link to it. So before I do, I'll do a quick shout out to Retro Bill, who says, shout out to Godzilla 37. Well, shout out to both of you gentlemen. Thank you very much indeed for all the super chats. Okay, so this video is called The Delayed Choice Quantum Eraser Debunked. I thought it was just Quantum Eraser Debunked. I'm not wrong. On the thumbnail, it says something different. Oh, well, that's immediately annoyed me. As soon as we haven't watched this, by the way. So on the thumbnail, it says the quantum eraser debunked. That's what it says on the thumbnail. Admittedly, in the title, which I didn't read because I'm lazy, underneath it, it says the delayed choice quantum eraser debunked. Well, I'm even less experienced with this. God, I hope Adam's here. Is he buggered off? My wingman I lent on when I made the decision to cover this has gone. Isn't that just typical? So we will, I guess. Oh, Skeptic936 has sent another
You're
super chat.
flying solo today.
Oh, God, I hope I have enough knowledge to cover what she's covering. You know, we'll see.
Can I make this
Skeptic936.
way more relevant?
Say again, AI.
I can make this way more relevant now that it's the delayed choice quantum eraser. So
Oh, for sure, but I'm not worried about its relevancy anymore. Quite the contrary. I'd be more keen if I'd have realised, like you say, the connections can be drawn easily. But my knowledge on the delayed choice quantum eraser is not exactly great. Anyway, let's just shout out Skeptic936. He says, with a purposeful grimace and a terrible sound, he pulls the spinning high tension wires down. Go, 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 Godzilla, yeah. Thank you for the super chat. I really appreciate the support. It's wonderful. Bills to pay and all that.
It's a
Blah.
song by Blue Oyster Cult. Go, go, Godzilla.
I'm glad you got the reference. Thank you for the support. I really appreciate it. Okay, so yes, we'll just sort of march on and hope that I don't make a fool of myself. We'll see how we get on.
A lot of you have asked me to do a video about the delayed choice quantum eraser, an experiment that supposedly rewrites the past. I haven't done that simply because there are already lots of videos about it. For example, Matt.
I don't know if that's the correct summary straight away off the bat, right? She said, how did she just phrase it? She said it changes the past? Rewrites the past. There you go. I wouldn't agree with that as a term, as a description for it. I don't know if anybody's going to back me up in this. Hopefully I'm going somewhere I should. I'm already on dodgy ground here. Okay. No, it's showing you the eventual outcome in advance, as opposed to rewriting what happened in the past. So straight off the bat, I don't necessarily agree with how she summarized this experiment. Anybody agree with me?
I'll give it a yes and no.
Okay, no, I'll try. Maybe this is going to be me educated in this. Fine, I'll accept that. It's time for a bit of humility. Go ahead, AI.
So why this is relevant to the expanding Big Bang heliocentric cosmology is the idea of how you see distant objects in the present day and the path that light takes to arrive at you. And that's why this whole idea even came about, because the idea of stars and gravitation and all this affecting the path of light. So you imagine like you're looking at a star light years away, and the light takes a while to get to you and has to pass objects. Those objects essentially become diffractive points. And just like in the, double slit, it changes the probabilistic outcome of where you can see things. And they use this to interpret how they're seeing distant objects. And that's why it's super relevant to heliocentrism.
Gotcha. I'm smiling from ear to ear because it seems so bloody obvious now you said it. That's how she's going to be interpreting it. And that's why she's phrased it that way. Gotcha. Now that makes total sense. Of course. Okay, great. Let's move on.
From PBS Spacetime, the always amazing Joe Scott, and recently also Don Lincoln from Fermilab. And how many videos do you really need about the same thing if that thing isn't a kitten in a box? However, having watched all those gentlemen's videos about quantum erasing, I think...
Quantum erasing? I don't know if that works either, does it? Okay, well, we'll let that slide.
They're all wrong. The quantum eraser isn't remotely as weird as you think, doesn't actually erase anything, and certainly doesn't rewrite the past. And
it erases a participant from it. From what I understand about the delayed choice quantum eraser experiment, it's a set and forget experiment, which is to say that it does its thing without you having to have any interaction with it. So, in terms of what it's erasing, it's a causally disconnected choice within the delayed choice quantum eraser. Therefore, you don't have to fiddle with it. You set it and you forget it. But that's taking you out of the equation, isn't it? That's what's being erased, if I'm not mistaken. Again, my limited knowledge. Go ahead, AO.
I was going to ask, isn't the erasing part the erasing one of the ways in which the knowledge can be gained, which is how the experiment works, isn't it? Right? Because I mean, I don't know how much detail she's going to go into, but isn't one of the paths that it takes you can't know, and that's how you get the interference pattern.
Perhaps. Your guess is as good as mine. QE's going to be turning in his grave when he has a heart attack and hears all this, you realise. Another shout out to Mike808, who just gives me money. I'm not going to say no. Really, really need it. Thank you so much. Right, let's move on.
Why are you erasing it?
Ah, thank God. My wingman's back. Hello, Adam. Where did you go?
Patience, mate. Patience. I don't know. Maybe QE will tell me off. But I just did that bit there, quantum erasing. She said we're not erasing anything. I don't think I ever conceptualized it as anything was ever being erased. Because nothing ever does get erased. It's just the way what renders is based on the observer being there. Now, you may consider that if I do know the which path and go backwards, and it's erased part of the data or something. But I don't think it's like that. It's not like you've made the cat alive again. It's at the point of whether that information is there is the choice as to which path which is formed. I've not ever heard of it being backwards and like retrospectively deleting the past as part of the claim, even though that.
Just give a very terrible breakdown of what's actually occurring, right? So you're firing off a light, but you're splitting it. So it's going on two journeys, right? But it's the same particle of light that's been split. And the first path gives you a shorter distance, if you like, for the light to travel through. And at the end, it's got a equivalent to a photographic plate that will show you either an interference pattern or wave function collapse, if you want to call it that, your two lines, right? But that happens, that path that gives you that result happens before the light that's going to go through one or other slit and either know or not know which one it's gone through hasn't actually happened for that light yet. So it's got to go on a longer journey, if you will, before it actually goes through that process of having the knowledge acquired from which slit it went through. So prior to it actually having the choice be made, if you want to look at it in that way, you already get the result. So you already know if you're going to have wave function collapse or not before it's gone through the slit detector. So by that distinction, you already know the outcome of what's going to happen to that light before it's technically happened, before the choice has been made. Hence, delayed choice, quantum eraser. That's why it's got the name. But that doesn't mean you're going back in time. It doesn't mean anything other than you know the outcome before it's strictly speaking happened. That's what it's showing. Anybody disagree with my summary? I profess to be no quantum. Go on.
Yeah. So you're not rewriting it.
I had Adam first. Go on, Adam.
Yeah, I think what Adam is saying is you don't have. I think what Adam is saying, if I'm correct, is you don't experience two realities when you're only experiencing one.
Are you?
Yeah, there is only one outcome going to be experienced at the end. You're never going to get a result in the delayed choice quantum eraser where you see a diffraction pattern at one end and go, oh my God, we got wave function collapse at the point that the choice was made. It's like, no, that's never going to happen. You fire it, you see what the outcome is, but that's occurred before the choice has been made. Then the choice gets made, but you've already found out the outcome. So it's not going to change. It fundamentally defies the principle. But yes, that's all it's doing. In the same way, if you simplify it back one step, you can acquire the information for which path the light went through in a double slit experiment to cause wave function collapse. Well, in this instance, that process happens later down the line, and prior to it happening, you see the outcome. That's the idea as I understand it.
Well, the alternative idea is that you don't make the choice until after the amount of time necessary for the light to pass the sensors, and therefore the sensors can't have been read until so you make the choice, like, which one you're going to read after it's assumed, based on time and distance, that the light has already passed the sensor.
No, you can't do that in
That is why
you can't do that in that particular apparatus setup because of your lack of interaction once it's set and in motion. You can't alter it. It's already going on one or other path, whether you like it or not, and you can't influence it in that regard.
Right.
So that's what I said that earlier. I'm sure it's set and forget in that regard. So where you're describing your interference with it, you can't do that in the delayed choice quantum eraser, unfortunately.
Can I ask a stupid question about it? Because my knowledge on all these.
Mine too, so be careful who you ask. Go ahead.
Yeah, but is it that the choice that is made is the choice that was always going to be made, whether you like it or not?
Yes.
Kind of like destiny.
Correct. Yes,
Right.
it's inevitability. Okay. Correct.
Okay, thank you.
God, I'm surprised. I'm hanging on by the skin of my teeth with this stuff. We're only about 50 seconds in.
That's what we'll talk about today.
You can always say the computer crashed.
I could. If I'm doing terribly, I'll just pull the plug out. Oh, it's just me tuning the RAM.
Let's start with a puzzle that has nothing to do with quantum mechanics.
We'll be all right then.
Peter's 46 years old and he's captain of a container ship. He ships goods between two places that are 100 kilometers apart.
He's going to need a flat earth for that.
Let's call them A and B. He starts his round trip at A with the ship only half full. 3/4 of the way to B, he adds more containers to fill the ship, which slows him down by a factor of 2. On the return trip, his ship is empty. How old is the captain? If you
That's a good question. I like it already.
don't know the answer, let's rewind this question to the beginning. Peter's 46 years old and he's captain of a container ship. Peter's 46 years old. The answer's right there. Everything I told you after that was completely unnecessary and just...
I don't know if I agree with that. We utilised what you said and turned it into a flat earth proof. I made use of those morsels that you thought you were just shaving off the bone for no reason. They were still tasty. Proved a flat earth.
Just there to confuse you.
Confuse me? Proved a flat earth with it.
Quantum eraser is a puzzle just like this.
Which is she talking about now, right? Which is quantum eraser. What are we gonna trust that she actually talks about the delayed choice quantum eraser experiment, or is she gonna start talking about the double slit?
The quantum eraser is an experiment that combines two quantum effects, interference and entanglement. Interference of quantum particles can itself be tested by the double slit experiment. For the double slit experiment, you shoot a coherent beam of particles at a plate with two thin openings. That's the double slit. On the screen behind it, you then observe several lines, usually 5 or 7, but not 2.
Okay, a couple of things just for the benefit of the audience in case this stuff's going over their head. It's nice and simple for me to be able to break down. What she's talking about is the diffraction pattern that you get when you shine a light through two slits. Now, obviously, you don't always get that, but at a certain point, you can get the light to have this interference pattern. Now, this interference pattern will go on to be mathematically qualified and described as a wave function. That would be a probability distribution. So as you fire, rather than in her graphic, she threw all the light at it all at once. Fine, no worries, it'll give you the same result. But you can fire individual particles. There's something called an argon pump laser. And what it does is it just basically gives you light like a little bullet, one at a time. And you can fire it at the double slit in the same way she just fired all of it at once. Now, if you were to fire it one at a time, what you would see is it hits this plate with the two openings. And as it goes through, the expected result would be that if it goes through this slit, it hits here, directly behind on the photographic plate. And if it goes through this slit, it hits here. That's the expected result. Light goes through hole, light hits behind hole, right? Well, no, that's not what we're going to be describing here, because that's not what's occurring. The light goes through one or other hole, we don't know which, and instead of going behind, it can go off over here. We'll call this point 1, yeah? Or it can go here, point 2, or here, point 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7. Now, which one will it hit? So if you fire the first piece of light, and it happens to hit at point 3, you scribble that down on your pad, and say, right, I fired one particle of light, and it hit at point 3. So by the limited information you've got so far, you go, all right, well, the only information I've got is that if I fire another one, it's going to hit at point 3, right? So you fire another one, and it hits at point 5. So you write that down. Okay, light went through holes, came out at point 5. So it's either going to be point 3 or point 5 on the next one. So you fire the next piece of light, and what do you know? It comes out at point 4. And so you keep writing down where the light comes, and you build up a picture of the probability of where the next impact will land. Now, that probability distribution is also termed wave function in mathematics. It's the probability distribution of the light in this example. Yeah? So, that's what we've got. That's what's being described. That is the phenomena. This is diffraction. That's what we're experiencing, right? So far, hopefully that's been so good for everybody to have a useful visual representation of what's going on so far with the phenomena of light diffraction.
This is an interference pattern created by overlapping waves. When a crest meets a trough, the waves...
Just for clarity, there is no distinct difference between interference and diffraction. They're the same thing.
Cancel, and that makes a dark spot on the screen. When crest meets crest, they add up, and that makes a bright spot. The amazing thing about the double slit...
That's not true. She's just described light waves crossing over to create high peaks. That is not correct.
Okay, but where did that idea come from?
Light waves?
No, the idea that she just said.
Sorry, just do a quick shout out, then I'll stop cutting you off. Just a shout out to One Deck. Thank you very much for just giving me money. Really appreciate the support. Sorry to cut you off a couple of times there. I go ahead.
Yeah, so we're talking about the pattern that's imprinted upon the final plate, the sensor. The pattern that's on the sensor, you would, agree that exists as a concrete reality. It's a pattern.
Yes.
How the pattern arrived there has been given explanations of how it functions underlyingly. Now, back in the day when the quote unquote diffraction patterns and all these things were first starting to be observed and really thought about, they were like, well, how do we get this pattern? Well, one guy noticed that you can get a similar pattern and a true interference pattern where waves constructively or destructively interfere with each other in water. So you take an object, you place it in water, you start shaking it, it creates ripples. You take another object next to it, you start shaking it, it creates ripples. And it is true that in water waves, they can constructively or destructively interfere with each other, creating higher peaks or lower valleys or a neutral point. And it will look identical to what appears to be the pattern in the slits. Now, because of this similarity, the person who did this said, this means of a necessity that this is the way light's behaving. And so from that explanation, the foundation of light most certainly is a wave, right, was accepted generally.
Right. So the propagation of light as a wave through a medium has been described by Sabine in this instance as creating peaks and valleys. Well, in the same way as it can be described as ripples that overlap one another, and when you get two overlapping ripples in a lake, you'll create a bigger peak. Or in the case of sound, if you get two frequencies that are sympathetic with one another that sit on top of each other, you get what's called a standing wave. That's an increased peak. Now, she's saying that in the light as it's passing through as a whole, and I qualified this earlier, I said, well, in her description, she's just got all of the light all at once being thrown through the double slit at the wall. And she's saying that the peaks and valleys are akin to peaks and valleys in a sound wave when you get a standing wave, because you get two complementary waves sat on one another in the medium of the air, which means you get a louder volume or an increased peak if you put it on a graph. That is not what's occurring here. So in the description below this video, and Quantum Eraser insisted that I put this in my video many years ago when I was just starting to get to grips with some of this stuff, and it's a narrated video with Morgan Freeman, I believe, as the narrator. And all it shows is the double slit experiment, but in the way I just described it, which is to say they're firing one light particle at a time. So this is how I'm going to debunk what Sabine's just said. In my description of how the light diffraction pattern is qualified for things like wavelengths, how we'll describe various types of lights, that's come from the various diffraction patterns and their qualifying description of a wave function in mathematics. That gives you your wavelength concept. But you can describe the wavelength concept by firing a single particle of light at the sensor or photographic plate behind the double slit. Well, if you can get one particle of light to go through the double slit and come out at point 1, why would it be an overlapping wave creating a high peak for the high brightness of the light? It's just one single impact with one point on the photographic plate. There is no doubling up of waves giving you a high peak. And conversely, in the same way as if you get a standing wave in a room or the bottom peak of a ripple through the water, you'll get an extra lull, a low peak, a depression in the water that's twice as deep when they overlap. Well, she's saying that the valleys between these light impacts are actually where the light as a wave, like sound or a ripple in a lake, have created this null, this dip. That's why we've got a low amount of light. No, because these dips are irrelevant to the impact of light that you can create with a single particle. Ergo, debunking the notion that they are high peaks and low valleys in an interference of a light as a wave through a medium. Light is not behaving in that way. And it is demonstrated and has been linked in every single live video for about the last 3 years below this video, with that description and a tangible demonstration of single particles creating wave function, i.e. the light diffraction pattern that you can qualify. So she's completely wrong in what she just said. I just want to make that absolutely abundantly clear for the reasons I gave, which is that it's going to be juxtaposed into light traversing a medium with a speed in Einsteinian conceptual fourth dimensional space-time. Sod all to do with how light actually behaves, and I can debunk what she said. I'm doing better than I thought.
And that makes a dark spot on the screen. When crest meets crest,
Wrong.
they add up, and that makes a bright spot.
If it's crest meeting crest, how do you achieve the same exact result with a single photon of light being fired through the double slit? You wouldn't, you couldn't, you're wrong.
The amazing thing about the double slit is that you get this pattern even...
See? What she's doing now is she's just shown what I've just said. Amazing. Brilliant. How handy. Thank you, Sabine. Or your graphic designer that may not be you and hasn't realised the implications of this graphic.
The screen. When crest meets crest, they add up, and that makes a bright spot. The amazing thing about the double slit is that...
Now, she is doing this with a stream of light, but you can see from the graphic, if I can get my mouse to be out of the way at the right moment,
that you get this...
Although it's going to be 2 at once, fine, it's good enough for me, right? In the argon pump laser, you can show this with just one particle, right? And at the point that it impacts, there, we got it. So these haven't impacted yet. We've got an impact at point 1. That's one impact. Well, how can it be waves of light creating peaks and nulls if in your own demonstration of it, you've got single impact of light hitting the photographic plate or sensor? That's not a peak. That's not a null. That's a single photon impacting the photographic plate, debunking what she just said about how this actually occurs. We're not even into the experiment yet, and she's wrong about the phenomena.
Even if you let only one particle at a time pass through the slits.
Well, how can it be a wave? She's about to debunk what she's just said, isn't she?
This means that even single particles act like waves.
No, they do not. If you're creating a non-interference pattern, you haven't got any information to derive a wave function if you've only got one impact. So how can it be a wave if the very definition of the wave is multiple points of impact with a description in mathematics of a wave function that could only be achieved with more than one impact? But if it goes through the photographic plate, or goes through the double slit, sorry, hits the photographic plate and has a single impact that's not directly behind the slit, well, then it's still exhibiting the effects of interference. It's not behind the slit, right? But how are you going to get any concept of a wave from that? You can't. There's not enough impacts to derive wave function mathematically. So you're wrong. Just saying arbitrarily that if you've only got one impact, a single particle, it still behaves like a wave. Well, no, it doesn't. Where's the wave function from a single impact? There isn't one. How are you going to get mathematical probability from a single point of impact? You've got one data point.
We
That
therefore
means some type of like backwards engineering, because she's saying that a single particle can act like a wave, but she's just looking at the conclusion of the interference pattern and saying, well, those particles formed this pattern. But they didn't do that single-handedly. She had to look at the conclusion of the interference pattern to say, they formed a pattern. They didn't act like that, act like a wave while they were singles.
You're getting too worse. You were at 60% audibility, now you're at 50. So can't make out what you're saying.
I'm sorry.
It's all right.
describe quantum particles with a wave function usually denoted psi.
Yeah, the wave function means you need more than one data entry point. So what you've just said in terms of a single photon being able to be described as being wave-like, it can't.
The interesting thing about the double slit experiment is that if you measure which slit the particles go through, the interference pattern disappears. Instead, the particles behave like particles again, and you get two blobs, one from each.
But how they weren't behaving like particles when you had one hit the photographic plate, and because they're all bunched together behind the lines that they went through, doesn't mean that they're suddenly not behaving like waves. They weren't behaving like waves prior. So this is nonsense. Quick shout out to Godzilla37, who says...
Hold on a second. Oh, go ahead.
I'll just, yeah, if you can hold that thought while I shout out Godzilla. 4 billion more hours, not a request to extend the show. Just how much longer we'll have to wait for Duper to prove the globe. Thank you very much indeed for the super chat, Godzilla. Go ahead, AI.
I was just gonna say, so you say to somebody, oh, they weren't behaving like such and so before, but it isn't even so much that they were behaving like that as it is in the result can be in some instances described by that behavior that would produce that result if all of those things were happening, like we previously mentioned in the water wave example, which, by the way, was the example demonstrated by a quote-unquote scientist of the past to his peers to settle a debate of the nature of light. He showed water waves and said, look, the pattern seems to match, therefore this is what light is. So just because your explanation quote-unquote matches and quote-unquote is logical and quote-unquote is a framework doesn't mean it's accurately describing the mechanisms that are behind what's happening. Cough, cough, ether.
Yeah, exactly. Another quick shout out to James Richard, who said, missed my $5 super chat. Oh, my bad. Let's just scroll back and see what you said.
He was probably shouting me out. That's why you missed it.
Yeah, I did miss it. My bad. I'm really sorry, James Richard, but I will. You've paid me to read it out twice, so it's only reasonable. Is this a natural phenomenon or man-made one? Is it a real experiment? Yeah, it's a real experiment. We're talking about light diffraction. I did qualify that. I'm sure I did. Yeah, it's definitely a real experiment. Light's real. Diffraction's a phenomena that happens with it.
Each of the slits. Well, actually you don't, though you've almost certainly seen that elsewhere. Just because you know which slit the wave function goes through doesn't mean it stops being a wave function.
What? What? The only way you can qualify it as a wave in any way, shape or form is to use the diffraction pattern to do it. So when you're saying it doesn't, let's just hear what she said again.
Though you've almost certainly seen that elsewhere. Just because you know which slit the wave function goes through doesn't mean it stops being a wave function.
By definition, to qualify as a wave function, you have to describe the probability distribution of it. There is no probability distribution to describe. There's no probability of anything. There's only certainty. It goes through one hole and hits behind the hole. Probability of what? It's going to hit behind the hole. So how is it a probability distribution, my love? Do you want to qualify that? On screen now, you've got a picture of wave function collapse, aka light goes through hole, hits behind hole. You give me the probability distribution for that, please. What's that? There isn't one, you crazy bint!
It's just no longer a wave function going through two slits.
Sorry, wave function going through... Sorry, are you nuts? Wave function doesn't go through slits. Wave function is the light impact at a varying point of probability on the photographic plate or sensor. Wave function doesn't go through slits! Are you nuts? Are you just talking crap?
It's now a wave function.
Sorry, she's pissed me off royally. Who suggested this video? Great choice.
I did.
Excellent choice. Right. Did we all hear that? She's describing how the description in maths of probability distribution, that's wave function, goes through slits. You crazy cow. Stop saying anything to do with this subject ever again. It's just stupid. If I know more about it than you do, you shouldn't be talking about it.
Going through only one slit.
What, when you've got both of the impacts? It's not going through one slit, it's going through both. She's just stupid. Are you blind? This is so irritating. I should not know more about what is literally on screen next to you. It's not going through one, it's going through both. Oh, this is super irritating.
So you get a one-slit diffraction pattern.
What? Diffraction pattern? Diffraction means interference. It's nothing interfering here. Is anybody else getting as irritated with this as me? Clearly not.
I'm not.
Well, there is no split diffraction, but she's jumped from the diffraction of multiple slits to diffraction pattern, edge diffraction on one slit. So she's almost clever, and I can't say it's intentional or just stupid.
I see what you're saying. I didn't catch that. Glad you've said that. Broken up as you were. You're saying that she's gone from describing the diffraction pattern we see when firing light through a double slit to single slit diffraction patterns. So she's basically using what you would get as an interference pattern that absolutely can be given a wave function description in maths because you've still got the probability distribution. It's just going through one slit. And she's saying, well, when we have the light going through one slit, it's akin to us still having the light being capable of being described as a wave. No, because in the example literally on screen now, there is no diffraction pattern to describe the probability thereof. This is just insane.
Yeah, but it's
What's
also a
that?
problem with the language that's a vestige from this initial thing that we spoke about before, where the bet was settled by using water as a demonstration, like a model, an attempt to be a model. Is even the term interference pattern being, called a diffraction pattern came from that,
Oh, I see.
because he showed the interference of the constructive destructive waves where it had peaks, valleys, and neutrals.
So it's akin to me saying, if you want to know the devastation that badgers cause and their cycles of destruction that come in waves, then check out my small scale example with mice. Because it's the same, basically. Light in air, same as water with a stone dropped in it. I mean, basically the same thing. Mice, badgers, plain thing. Well, what's the problem?
Well, the thing about it,
And rest
that,
assured, you could chart the waves, quote unquote, of destruction, on a graph, and it would look like an undulation, right? Similar to a quote unquote wave, right? And then you could say later on that badger destruction is a wave-like phenomenon that requires a medium of transport. Woo-hoo!
Exactly. Exactly. That's exactly where I was going. Yeah, perfect. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, what I was going to say is, from her point of view, you see, she needs to reify what happens with the water into a situation where light is confined to 671 million miles per hour, and it moves through the heliocentric universe at that rate, which is the same rate as gravitational waves. You know, that's where her. So if you're coming from her thinking, her thinking would stop her from understanding it, I would say.
That's also an interference pattern, but a fuzzier one, and indeed looks mostly like a blob.
How is it an interference pattern? Looks nothing like what you'll derive things like the wavelengths of light in their varieties from this. They won't give you that because it isn't a wave function.
But a very blurry blob. And if you add the blobs from the two individual slits, they'll overlap and still pretty much look like one blob. Not as...
What? These two things don't look pretty much the same. They look completely different.
You see
Well, it
many
makes
videos.
sense if... Sorry, it makes sense if we get rid of the short distances. The shorter distances, it'll make more sense if we get rid of those.
I see. So if we work at the sort of only long distance scales. I see.
Those two cleanly separated ones. You may think this is nitpicking, but it'll be relevant to understanding the quantum eraser, so keep this in mind. It's not so relevant for the double slit experiment because regardless of whether you think it's one blob or two, the sum of the images from both separate slits is not the image you get from both slits together. The double slit experiment therefore shows that in quantum mechanics, the result of a measurement depends on what you measure. Yeah.
You haven't got into it though. You haven't explained the effect at all. All you've done is qualify how you will be describing light as a wave.
Yes, that's weird. The other ingredient that...
Nathan.
Yes.
Yes, thanks. Is she trying to pull something early on so she could do something later by saying an interference pattern really is a blob magnified?
Perhaps, but she's going against the defining principles of wave function collapse because that blob represents no longer having interference. That's what the blob is. So, you know, two blobs behind a slit, one behind one slit and one behind the other, is the antithesis of wave function. But if you understood this experiment, you'd understand that because that's the result, that's the outcome. But she's convoluting it like it's not the outcome of the actual double slit experiment. It's like, okay, why convolute what light is? Oh, well, because she needs it to be a wave.
Yeah, well, my point is, if you can't identify it with words, then interference pattern and blog or solid pattern is the same thing at the end because she's going to interchange whenever she wants to.
But it shows a fundamental misunderstanding of the principle of the double slit experiment. When you get that quote-unquote blob, or blobs, that's removing the interference. You've no longer got light with an interference pattern. What's an interference pattern? Well, that's the thing you'll describe as having a wave function, the probability distribution of the light when it has interference. When you have wave function collapse, the collapse bit is the description of no longer having any interference. And if you haven't got any interference, aka it's collapsed, you can't describe the probability distribution of the interference anymore. She's just talking nonsense.
That you need for the quantum eraser is entanglement. I've talked about entanglement several times previously, so let me just briefly remind you. Entangled particles share some information, but you don't know which particle has which share until you measure it. It could be, for example, that you know the particles have a total spin of 0, but you don't know the spin of each individual particle. Entangled particles
got no relevance on this whatsoever. I mean, for the delayed choice quantum eraser experiment, and again, we described this right at the beginning of this, you've got a experiment that splits them. So they're basically combined particles, right? Well, at the point that they're no longer combined and they go on the path I described earlier, one gives you the outcome before it's gone through the choice mechanism. That's what's occurring. That's the only reason you need this description. Now, she's using it for something I don't know what yet, because there's no need to give you that description beyond
she
what
just
I
did
gave.
it again. Nathan, she just did it again. She gave a double meaning to one word. It measures 0, but that doesn't mean each one had 0.
Right. Yeah, but I don't know what she's going to utilize that for later. I mean, there's like I said, no need for
No,
this.
I know, but if you go to the first one, but if you go to the first one, it's interference and it's not interference, and she says the same thing. So she's now did it twice to lead up to what she's going to do with it.
Okay.
Isn't that a fallacy, because they are
Yeah, it's called equivocation.
There you go. Speed of light, that's where she's going to.
allow you to measure quantum effects over large distances, which makes them super extra weird. Okay, now to the quantum eraser. You take your beam of particles, usually photons, and direct it at the double slit. After the double slit, you place a crystal that converts each single photon into a pair of entangled photons. From each pair, you take one and direct it onto a screen. There, you measure whether they interfere. I have drawn the photons which come from the two different places in the crystal with two different colors, but this is just so it's easier to see what's going on. These photons actually have the same color.
Okay, so far so good in terms of a broad description of the basics of what happens first. Not bad.
If you create these entangled pairs after the double slit, then the wave function of the photon depends on which slit the photons went through. This information comes from the location where the pairs were created and is usually called the which-way information. Because of this which-way information, the photons on the screen can't create an interference pattern. What's with the other side of the entangled particles?
Why is she saying it and showing something that she's not saying? It can't create an interference pattern. So why have you shown an interference pattern?
That's where things get tricky. On the other side, you measure the particles in two different ways. In the first case, you measure the which-way information directly, so you have two detectors, let's call them D1 and D2. The first detector is on the path of the photons from the left slit, the second detector is on the path of the photons from the right slit. If you measure the photons with detectors D1 and D2, you see no interference pattern. But alternatively, you can turn off the first two detectors and
See, this is what I've been trying to explain. People's misunderstanding of the phenomena in the actual experiment, because they're like, oh, quantum mechanics, all that magical woo-woo stuff. Yeah, that's because this is the person informing them. They're still going to Google to for whatever hold grudges against us. Like, I mean, Sam, wake up.
and instead combine the two beams in two different ways. These two white bars are mirrors and just redirect the beam. The semi-transparent one is a beam splitter. This means half of the photons go through and the other half is reflected. This looks a little confusing, but the point is just that you combine the two beams so that you no longer know which way the photon came. This is the erasure of the which-way information. And then you measure those combined beams in detectors D3 and D4. A measurement on one of those two detectors does not tell you which slit the photon went through. Finally, you measure the distribution of photons on the screen that are entangled partners of those photons that went to D3. These photons create an interference pattern. You can
What? The
Are you on
computer
mute?
crash?
Oh, it's me on mute. Sorry.
Maybe we're
I was talking through it and not on. My bad. Okay, so we already know the outcome. We already know that we're going to get an interference pattern. So we haven't established which path information at the slit detector because of the outcome already being predetermined. We can see we've got an interference pattern. So she didn't do a bad job. Does anybody have any critique of how she's described the quantum eraser, delayed choice quantum eraser experiment thus far? Because I don't. If anybody does, please say now, or we'll move on if not. Nope.
Well, other than initially giving a double meaning to two of the statements prior to going into it, I think that is the big mistake of her. The one thing can't mean the other. I mean, a solid line versus
notwithstanding, I just want to know if you have any critique
thing.
of a description of the experiment itself in this depiction. I don't. If you do, fine. If not, we've already covered that.
Can alternatively measure the distribution of photons on the screen that are partner particles of those photons that went to D4. Those will also create an interference pattern. This is the quantum erasure. It seems you've managed to get rid of the which-way information by combining those paths, and that restores the interference pattern. In the delayed choice quantum eraser experiment, the erasure happens well after the entangled partner particle hit the screen. This is fairly easy to do just by making the path of those photons long enough. If you watch the other videos about this experiment on YouTube, they'll now go on to explain that this seems to imply that the choice of what you measure on the one side of the experiment decides what happened on the other side before you even...
No, that's not the implication. So maybe I'm going to agree with what she says in the next statement.
...made that choice. Because the photons must have known whether to interfere or not before you decided whether to erase the which-way information. But this is clearly nonsense, because let's rewind this explanation to the beginning. Because of this which-way information, the photons on the screen can't create an interference pattern. The photons on the screen can't create an interference pattern. Everything I told you after this is completely irrelevant. It doesn't matter at all what you do on the other side of the experiment. The photons on the screen...
Other than you haven't got the desired effect if you've got the interference pattern, because you're trying to get it to collapse. The point of the outcome is, how is it achieved? What causes the wave function collapse? And you're saying, but at the start, we don't have it. Well, yeah, because you haven't established which path information. It's been removed, so you don't have the outcome anymore. You've just got the interference. Well, what's that useful for? Well, I suppose you could mathematically qualify that interference pattern as a light diffraction wave function. Yeah, that's useful. You can do all sorts of things with that. But it doesn't actually achieve anything in the experimental sense. Because there's no cause and effect happening. You've just got the phenomena. So what caused the wave function collapse if you haven't got it? You're saying, well, there's no point going forward. Well, no, because you've still just got interference in your description. Fundamentally, she doesn't understand the principle and what's being achieved at the end of the delayed choice quantum eraser. But by virtue of that, I can only assume she doesn't understand the implications of the double slit experiment either. Because if she understood, and I said this earlier, I'm sure I did, if she understood the difference between the diffraction pattern, aka wave function when described mathematically, and wave function collapse, the two blobs that she described, she'd understand that those are the two different states that you're studying. And the causal influence is knowledge of which path the light went through. And when you have the knowledge of which path, you no longer have interference anymore. She just doesn't understand any of this, does she? I mean, I was worried that I'd be stumbling over it and she might humiliate me in my lack of knowledge. I know more than she does about this.
Yeah, I was going to say that she's so far between where she started and where she concluded that she confused herself along the way because no one was correcting her as she went.
Yeah,
I would say a bit different. I would say that she doesn't know what science is in the first place. So she doesn't realize she's making a mistake because she doesn't know the process she's supposed to be adhering to.
Okay. Not that we've got over 100 people even watching at the moment, but we're going to carry on live and actually round out this Sabine video just because I don't want to necessarily tail it into a next show. So we'll carry on with this.
Will always create the same pattern, and it'll never be an interference pattern.
What? That's what wave function is, an interference pattern. When you say it'll never be an interference pattern, you've said that the end result of the outcome is that you've just got the diffraction pattern on the screen, right? Now you're saying it'll never be an interference pattern, but that's all you've got. You've only got... She's just nuts. There's no other conclusion I can draw. She's just balmy.
Wait.
If you don't know what balmy means, by the way, I'll just tell you, just because this is interesting. I don't often get to use the word balmy, but it's a British term. So in Kent, there's a mental asylum in Barming, and the Barming mental asylum is where you would be sent if you were a lunatic. So a lunatic is somebody that looks at the moon and talks about how the moon behaves. That's a lunatic. And if you're a lunatic, you're going to be locked up in Barming. That's the mental asylum in Kent. And if you are locked up in Barming, you are barmy. Hence the term barmy, in case you were wondering.
Didn't I just tell you?
We call that cousins at Bellevue.
We call it, what do you call it? Bellevue.
Yeah, same thing. But barmy's better.
That you do get an interference pattern if you use detectors D3 and D4? Indeed.
Yeah, because that's the point of the experiment. That when you know, i.e. you detect which path it went through, you cause wave function collapse. Yeah, you've just been educated in the very basic principles of the double slit experiment, Sabine. Pathetic that you don't understand it.
But I've omitted a crucial part of the information which is missing in all those other YouTube videos.
What, knowledge of which path? The fundamental principle of the experiment itself? Yeah, you have missed that, haven't you, love? Yeah, no shit.
It's that those interference patterns are not the same. And if you add them, you get exactly the same as you get from detectors 1 and 2.
Who cares? The point of the experiment is to detect wave function collapse. Oh my God. So you've just decided to divine something else that's outside the purview of the experiment in the hypothesis. Because who gives a flying crap? This has absolutely sod all to do with the delayed choice quantum eraser experiment.
Namely, these two overlapping blurry blobs. This is why it matters that you know the combined pattern of...
Right, combined patterns versus blurry blobs. Blurry blobs would be wave function collapse. That's two lights, the strip of lights behind the slit exactly as you'd expect. And the diffraction pattern is the wave function that you seem to be implying both simultaneously always occurs because lights are wave traversing a medium, but also is the only outcome you can ever achieve if you don't acquire knowledge of which path, which means you don't understand this experiment.
Of two single slits doesn't give you two separate blobs as they normally should.
It should normally if you know which path they went through. You don't get that unless you know which path it's gone through. That means you need to have the slit detectors. My God, woman!
Show you. What you actually do in the eraser experiment is that you sample the photon pairs in two groups, and you do that in two different ways. If you use detector 1 and 2, you sample them so that the entangled partners on the screen do not create an interference pattern for each detector separately. If you use detector...
Detecting what? It's not the detectors that are causing this. It's the knowledge of which path.
3 and 4, they each separately create an interference pattern.
No, they do not. Incorrect. Slit detectors do not cause or solve interference, aka wave function collapse. That has absolutely sod all to do with the detectors themselves, and everything, this is the cause of the effect, to do with knowledge of which path. What kind of detectors are they, Sabine? What did you call them? Which way detectors? Yeah, you need to know which way! You crazy bint!
But together...
He has to be making this all up, isn't he?
Which
She
way
has to be
information? Which
making
path?
this up,
Same thing.
because how could you misinterpret it like this?
She doesn't understand the experiment.
I mean-
She doesn't understand the basic principles of what's being done. That's how she's misinterpreted it. She's read between the lines about what her light as a wave will do. In between the hypothesis-based experiment that she's pulling apart. No. If you want to critique what's actually occurring, why don't you look at the hypothesis? Does she even know it?
I don't
They
think so,
don't.
but she's not even using the right word. She's not using the vernacular that we have come to adjust to, involving the actual quantum eraser and the knowing which path experiment, right? And she's not using those words, so it does seem like she completely made this up. But you have to know that then. Like, this is just really bad. Really bad.
This means that the interference pattern really comes from selectively disregarding some of the particles.
Sorry, the interference pattern is just interference. That's all it is. Not coming from anything. It's just the light has interference. I don't get it. Why is she telling us where the interference comes from? That's the phenomena you're studying. Where it comes from is irrelevant. Why it happens, that's what you're doing with science, trying to figure out the cause of it.
That this is possible has nothing to do with quantum mechanics.
It's the definition of what quantum mechanics is if you understand what it is.
I could throw coins on the floor and then later decide to disregard some of those and
Or you could fire physical buckyballs through a double slit, as opposed to light particles. And you can observe the exact same bloody effect. With things that are physical.
Making this up.
She's just making this shit up. Yeah, she's just talking shite. No, we're not throwing coins through double slits, though, are we, love?
create...
Nathan,
Yes.
according to Phil B in chat in all caps, he said, "You don't understand the experiment." Good rebuttal.
Okay.
any kind of pattern. Clearly, this doesn't rewrite the pattern.
Is this, just to finish that off, this is the same Phil B that doesn't know what an elevation angle is, so don't pay too much attention to this Phil B.
That's correct.
Okay, we're responding to Sabine. For the moment, there is no Phil B.
Past. This, by the way, has nothing to do with the particular realization of the quantum eraser experiment that I've discussed.
That you've discussed, or the actual outcome of the experiment based on a hypothesis? You see, what you've discussed is just nonsensical dribble.
This experiment has been done in a number of different ways, but what I just told you is generally true. These interference patterns will always combine to give the original non-interference pattern.
Sorry, the original non-interference pattern, you think that combining them will give you wave function collapse? Because if you combine them, you've just got a bigger interference pattern. Yeah? But the point of the experiment is wave function collapse. The light behaving exactly as it does in everyday experience. If you shine a light through a keyhole, you don't expect the light to fly off to the left randomly, do you? You expect light to be on the other side of the keyhole, directly behind where you shine the light through. Right? This phenomena, right, is just the phenomena that's being studied. But you're saying if I take the phenomena and overlay a different phenomena on top of it, who cares? Right. Cause and effect, my love.
This is not to say that there's nothing weird going on in this experiment.
You didn't explain the experiment. You just detailed the phenomena only, and then introduced a different version of the same phenomena. So you haven't detailed the experiment.
What does it even mean? Something weird going on in an experiment? Like, that's not... that. Like, what is she talking? That's not... If there's something weird going on, then there's no oversight over what the experiment is. It makes absolutely no sense. She's literally just talking gibberish.
Correct. She doesn't understand the principles of science. The hypothesis has a null and an alternative. If A, then B, or if A, not B. And you're trying to establish that A causes B. What's the cause in this instance? Well, knowledge of which path causes wave function collapse.
Well, Brian literally did say that.
That is weird, though.
Well, it's two of you going at once. Hold on. AI. Go ahead, Brian.
No, I didn't say that.
That was
That
Elijah.
was Elijah said. I said. I said just reference what I said. AI. I want to say that.
AI, go ahead.
Well, my point was that the knowledge of the witch path having a result on the final outcome that's imprinted upon the physical plate is weird. Now, it's not so much weird now that that's already been established, but before it was established, that concept, right, coming across it would be very weird. Because we are so saturated with physical assumption bias and the idea of universal concretism of objects that exist outside of us, and that their paths and placements are fixed regardless of our interactions with them, right? To encounter something that's demonstrable evidence that that's not true, that's weird.
Yeah. But she didn't detail that, though, did she? All she detailed was the phenomena. So, yeah. Shout out to Elvis Kaforic, or Kafolvik, who just gives me money. Thank you very much for the super chat. Really appreciate the support. Thank you very much indeed. If you do take pity on me, as I've got a shitload of outstanding bills, send me a PayPal. That'd be much more helpful for the immediate future. Not that I'm e-begging. I am actually e-begging. I'm really poor. Anyway, let's move on.
But what's weird about it is the same thing that's weird already about the normal double slit experiment. Namely, if you look at the wave function of a single particle, then that...
Excuse me? Come again?
What?
The wave,
wave
function of a single particle. Yeah, you heard her right, Arwen. You go ahead. You go ahead.
I'm sorry, that's just so funny.
That's the dumbest thing she said so far. If you have a single particle impact, how can you derive probability distribution of the next one that's going to come? Okay, so you fire a single light particle through a slit, and it, on my scale that I gave earlier arbitrarily, hits at point 1 on the far left. Okay, so you get your piece of paper and you write down your first data entry point. Okay, one particle hit at point... I don't actually have any information to even give me a scale yet, really, so I can't really call it point 1 versus point 7 because it's just an arbitrary point that it's hit. So I'll just say hit a point arbitrarily behind the slit that wasn't directly behind it. Okay, right. Okay, Sabine, we've got our one data entry point for our single particle impact, a single photon on the photographic plate or sensor. Now give me the wave function.
Maybe
Go.
it's a presuppositional wave function.
No. Wave function is, fact, a mathematical term. It's probability distribution. That's what it is as a mathematical term. So given that it's describing the distribution of probability, I'm going to need some distribution of something to do it with, aren't I?
Unless you presuppose that it is going to be a
No.
wave.
She's given us a... Arwen, don't go off the track. She's given us an example. One particle impact. What's the distribution of that one impact, please?
It's just a one impact.
So what's the probability
maybe
distribution of a single impact? Can it be done?
There can't be any. The probability is either 0 or 1, depending on your mathematical philosophy.
But sorry, that sounds very binary as
However-
opposed to... That doesn't sound like it's going to give me a wave or a wave function or anything like that, though, does it?
Yeah, but yeah,
Unless-
you wouldn't have a wave function. You'd have a probability of 1, which would just be a line. So it couldn't be graphed as a wave. However, we could be hypercritical of her because she might actually explain that it's over time, like single photon impacts mapped over time. If she does that, then she will save herself, even though
Contradiction. Contradiction in terms. Single photon impact mapped over time is multiple photon impacts, isn't it?
No, not yeah, but not a single photon fired at once, charted. A next single photon fired at once, charted. Not multiple photons fired simultaneously.
Yeah, one at a time. Yeah, but when you get to the first one, which is what she's just described, there is no distribution yet to give you wave function. She said a single impact, single photon will give you wave function. She's just mathematically incorrect.
She has to salvage that. She has to salvage that in her next phraseology. Otherwise, she stands as retarded.
We'll see.
Well,
Let's
you
hear
could
it again.
think of it as a wave function if you
Alwyn.
just presuppose it's going to be a wave. That was my point.
She's not what she said. We'll hear it again.
Distributes in space. Yet, when you measure it, the particle is suddenly in one particular place, and the result must be correlated throughout space and fit to the measurement setting.
Sorry, the measurement setting, there's only one of them. There it is. Give me the probability distribution of this single impact, Sabine. Go. Yeah, the look on her face on pause would be the exact same look on her face if she was here. Because it cannot be done mathematically. It is retarded to assert such nonsense, Sabine.
She always has that look on her face.
I actually think the bomb experiment is far weirder than the quantum eraser. Check out.
So, moving away from your total nonsense and misapprehensions of mathematical descriptions of probability distribution off the back of saying you can get probability distribution off a single impact, no, you can't. But the bomb experiment's extremely fascinating. What a great segue.
My earlier video for more on that. When I was working on this video, I thought certainly...
There was your first mistake. That was where it all went wrong. Next time, don't put any thought into it and don't do it. Because you're going to make a fool of yourself when some flat earther who openly declares he doesn't know much about quantum mechanics humiliates you by pointing out that you've claimed a single photon impact can give you a probability distribution. Ludicrous. Like stupid. You shouldn't have flat earthers capable of telling you how stupid you are and be mathematically correct. Me, I'm not very good at maths. I'm first to admit it. Certainly not anything like an expert when it comes to the delayed choice quantum eraser experiment. Yeah, still managed to humiliate you, didn't I? It's absurd. People look up to you.
Someone must have explained this before, but the only person I could find...
You didn't explain Jack Love. You didn't go through cause and effect reasoning. You didn't detail the hypothesis. Literally, you didn't even detail the hypothesis for this experiment. You think you did a good job, and you're now critiquing yourself versus the other people out there? What a joke.
Who done that is Sean Carroll in a blog post 2 years ago. Yes, you can trust Sean with the quantum stuff.
We can trust Sean with the quantum stuff. Did you trust him, Dumbo? Because you didn't do well. If this is an endorsement for that guy, no, this Sean guy doesn't want you anywhere near him. Don't try and endorse him. Don't tar him with this horrible brush that you've now got. Because he doesn't need you promoting him. You don't know what the hell you're talking about. I'm just going to speak on behalf of this Sean guy, who I have no clue who he is, and say, no, don't worry, my friend. Yeah, this total clown is no reflection on you and your understanding of the quantum eraser experiment. She hasn't got the slightest idea. Like, totally clueless. The mathematical...
Yeah, it would be more...
Go on.
It would be more like a demotion. It would be more like a demotion. Like, oh, thanks. She likes me. I'm in trouble now because that means I'm full of shit.
Yeah, people are going to think I'm as dumb as she is with this stuff. Don't promote me, love, please.
Well, Sean Carroll is like a pretty famous. I think he's an astrophysicist or an astronomer. He's pretty famous. You can find him online.
And in the spirit of exactly that, I'm going to share this link. So obviously, we all love Sabine here, and we're all going to become subscribers as a result of this video that we've just made about her. And obviously, I'd encourage that you go and check out her stuff, which I'm sure is a vast catalogue of material from this chick on YouTube that you can waste your hours and hours with. But just let her know, let her know. Oh, by the way, I found out about you through this channel called Nathan Oakley 1980, who coincidentally responded to one of your videos. Love your stuff. I subscribed. Maybe you can go and check out Nathan Oakley 1980 as well. And in the spirit of anybody who obviously reacts to the stuff that we're putting out in this regard, I'd encourage you to do the same for me, which is to say, pop a link to my video if you're going to respond to what we've said about your total and utter ignorance in regards to the quantum eraser and delayed choice experiments. Subscribe today, yeah. Let them know Nathan Oakley 1980 sent me, if you do.
You'll link to Sean's piece in the info below. This video was sponsored by Brilliant.
Couldn't give a crap. Okay, I think we're done with that.
Brilliant.
Okay. Any last comments? We've gone half an hour over on the live show today. Hey, John.
Well,
That was amazing.
sorry.
I didn't think it would sink lower than it had been already, but apparently I was wrong, and they can, with a straight face, completely mock up like rudimentary knowledge in these fields. Is this crazy?
Well,
This is just crazy.
you've had young Skywalker trying to stumble his way through the delayed choice quantum eraser, and hopefully we had the person with the very namesake quantum eraser listening in. How did we do? Are you there?
I'm eating.
Oh, okay. Well, if it makes you feel, confident about the future of the Quantum Eraser YouTube channel, this has been by far and away my least watched live show for quite some time. So people love this subject. 86 people watching.
What'd you do?
Talked about delayed
real
choice,
quick,
had Sabine
before
on
you-
screen, that sort of thing.
I didn't hear
Before you get into that,
Oh, shut
think-
Elijah. Wait a second. What did you do?
Responded to Sabine and her nonsense assertions of there being a capability of deriving wave function from a single photon impact, for example.
Sabine? Oh, you did the Sabine quantum eraser exposition.
Yes, we did.
How'd you like that?
It made me. How did I like it? Quite a lot. It made me feel a lot more confident about my understandings, or what I assumed to be the lack thereof at the beginning of it. Now I actually feel quite confident, surprisingly.
Yeah, she's a kook, isn't she?
She's totally balmy. She's nuts.
Yeah, she doesn't understand the double slit experiment. I watched it when it first came out. It was, oh man, it was a long time ago. And I got through like the first 4 or 5 minutes, and I said, this kook doesn't even understand the simple double slit experiment, and she's giving an exposition on the quantum eraser? Yeah, right. It's like listening to Elmer Fudd give an exposition of the fucking gluconeogenesis pathway.
That's right, please. But yeah, okay. So I came to the same conclusion about a bit further along into the video, maybe 6 or 7 minutes in. I came to the conclusion that not only she should not be talking about the delayed choice, she doesn't understand the double slit experiment.
Yeah. That's the conclusion you came to? It should have been quick.
That was the conclusion I came to about halfway through.
All right, you did a good job then.
What I didn't do a good job of was breaking down, which was, I thought, a reasonable explanation she gave with the diagram of the delayed choice itself. I thought she did a reasonable job in that regard. I don't know if you agree.
I can't remember it.
It was okay. It wasn't bad.
I'm gonna have to go through it. I'm gonna have to
I
go
had to
through it.
break his arm to do it. He was scared shit, Chewy.
I can't even get a fucking word out, man.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Neil. He's talking to me. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Neil.
Oh, I thought he said Neil. I said he didn't want to do the video.
Maybe
I
I
had to
should
break his
interject
arm because
now.
he was scared shit.
Neil's trying to say I
What,
didn't want to do the
John?
video because I was scared my knowledge wouldn't be sufficient to undo her misapprehensions. In other words, if I haven't got a really good foundational knowledge of the delayed choice quantum eraser experiment, how can I be expected to pull apart her critique of it if I don't know where she's right and wrong fully? Well, I didn't need to be worried. Brian said I didn't need to be worried, and I wasn't. At the end, I was quite bolstered in confidence, to be frank. So yeah, thanks, Neil.
Of course, I armed you, even though that was a while ago that we went through it. I mean, you should still have that knowledge to defeat Hossenfelder.
Yeah, thank you.
What did she tell the Earth's a sphere because of planes and eyeglasses? Why weren't you confident?
When it comes to explaining the delayed choice quantum eraser experiment and the implications thereof, I struggle.
Nah, you got it.
It's complicated though, isn't it?
Well,
yeah, it is. I know where my pay grade is. The delayed choice is above it. The double slit, no worries. I can explain it. I can argue with it about it. But when you're just not 100% confident in something, you just, if someone came on the panel and started live debating me about the delayed choice, they'd have me over a barrel pretty quickly, I would expect. if they had a reasonable
Nah,
knowledge of it.
not too many people understand it. It's just ripe for confusion because there's two issues going on in the experiment. You got the delayed choice, and then you got the quantum eraser, hence delayed choice quantum eraser. So it's very easy for somebody to convolute this stuff. It could be sent into the incoherent oblivion in no time. And that's what people do. Now, this cuck, like I said, when I first listened to it, I can just remember laughing about her fundamental knowledge of, or lack of knowledge, of just a simple double slit. That was wrong. So, what's going to happen when you go to a delayed choice quantum eraser? You already know it's going to be a dumpster fire. That's what probably happened, right? I can't remember exactly what she said, but I remember laughing a lot.
Yeah. Well, where you laughed, I was filled with outrage, if I'm honest.
Yeah, but it's Sabine Hossenfelder, man. You got to cut her, it just be kind of dumb animal week.
Fair enough. With that, I'll say if you are watching this on either Nathan Oakley 1980 or Nathan Oakley Programming Streams, then stay tuned as there will be an after show to follow. Unfortunately, if you are watching this live, this is where we bid you farewell. So another massive thank you to all of you who smashed the super chat, liked, commented, shared, subscribed, hopefully solved my poverty problem via PayPal and all that good stuff. Another massive thank you to today's live and live Discord and G+ panels for making today's live show possible. I've been Nathan Oakley, and I will see you all in the next video.
What a lovely day!
What the wall? What's up?
I might be able to do it. I might be